Namaste, good morning. Over the past 10 years, I've attended, all of us have, several lit fests and such discussions and platforms, etc. And where we have always been talking about how we are rediscovering our ancient heritage, our philosophical traditions, our spiritual legacies, the Vedas, the Upanishads, Puranas, Mahabharata. In this session, I want to take that as read. I want to take all the research as done. And I want to ask three questions to all my three great panelists around when we look back, we look at our ancestors, we look to our ancestors for spiritual or storytelling or discovery of ourselves, our country, our sacred land. And we go back 5,000 years ago to epics like the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Puranas. We look at spiritual traditions such as the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Darshanas. At the same time, I want to ask a question, which is 5,000 years from now, when we become ancestors, all of us in this room, when we become ancestors, what will our descendants look up to in this Kali age? What did we do? What did we accomplish? What new universes did we carve out? Will they have to travel 10,000 years back to reach what Sanatan, the Sanatan Dharma of 10,000 years ago? Be it in storytelling, be it in philosophy, be it in Dharma, be it in spirituality? Or would we, at this age, when we are standing at this transition, have contributed something or the other? So I have only three questions, and I'm going to begin with Ami, which is that the Mahabharata, the Ramayana are universes. Why are we not writing the 21st century universes? Why do we keep going back to 5,000 years ago?
Namaste everybody. Jai Shri Ram. Jai Jai Shri Ram. So Gautam ji जब हमें अभी बता रहे थे what he wants to talk about and we were like अरे बाप रे ये तो बहुत कठिन प्रश्न है because we really don't have answers to that. However, I will attempt to share what I believe is happening. Going back to the past, I think it has always happened. Mahabharata, Ramayana का अपील ही ऐसा है that even when they were written, we are told about Ramayana that as long as the mountains stand, यावत् स्थास्यति गिरयः सरिताश्च नदी धरणी स्थले तावत् रामायण कथा लोकेषु प्रचरिष्यति. As long as the mountains stand, as long as the rivers flow, the story of Ramayana will remain relevant in the world. The same goes for Mahabharata. And if you see in the past, Gautam ji, Mahabharata, Ramayana हुए, then Kalidas came. He also wrote on those themes. आगे जाते जाते we have other dramatists who Bhasa, Kalidas of course, who kept coming back to some of those themes till as late as Tulsidas ji, who again wrote on Ramayana, and that keeps going on and on and on. And I think what has happened with us right now, so before talking about future, because I don't yet have an answer to that, I will say what has happened with our generation. With our generation, one of the biggest issues that has happened is that continuity has not remained. To say कि 5,000 साल से जो अविरत परंपरा चली आ रही है, ज्ञान परंपरा चली आ रही है, I don't think that's true for us who have been born after the independence. We've lost out on that in the last 100 years. So for a lot of us, this is like realizing that there's so much that a culture has. It's like a child in a candy store who suddenly realized कि अरे बाप रे ये सब मेरे पास है और आज तक मुझे पता ही नहीं था. So we are in that stage and hence we are still latching on to the past. I believe as we progress, as we become arthik star pe better, because at the end of the day, at the first presentation which Rahul ji showed, right, he said happiness is a byproduct. He said artha is the byproduct, happiness is the outcome. Kautilya says, sukhasya moolam dharma, dharmasya moolam artha. Artha is not necessarily a byproduct. Artha is the foundation. Only when the artha is there, can we have the luxury of saying, let's talk philosophy, let's talk culture. Now we are reaching that stage. And I genuinely believe with people here who are not looking down on the past, but learning from it, we'll create a lot more. Thank you.
Thanks, Ami. I want to come to you, Ashwin, before I come to non-fiction. You know, Mahabharata is a universe. You open the book and you are transported into that universe. Likewise, Isaac Asimov's Foundation series is a universe. Star Wars is a universe. Lord of the Rings is another universe. You're a storyteller who takes the past, who takes the current, imagines the future. You transcend geographies, you transcend symbolism, mysticism, myths. But where is the Indian new universe, which can be half or 1/10 the equivalent of a Mahabharata?
I would say that when I think about it, I feel that somehow in soft power terms, and Sanjeev Sanyal can correct me if I'm right or wrong, but I feel that soft power, which is whether in terms of our ability to be able to influence outcomes around the world, is somewhat related to also our hard power, which is whether it is our economic might or our military might, as it were. So why is it that, for example, you can have an epic like the Ramayana, which is then told 300 times, retold 300 times in different parts of the world? I mean, you can still go today to, let's say, Malaysia and have a puppet performance of the Hikayat Seri Rama, which is fundamentally conveying the same story. Or why go far? I mean, look at 2200 years ago, you had a set of stories which emerged from Kashmir, which was known as the Panchatantra. And what caused that Panchatantra to be written? Because there was a king who said that my kids, they don't know how to govern. So I need to teach them the fundamentals of what governance is. And then that particular story gets picked up. How? Because there is a Persian medical scholar who happens to be in Kashmir at that time. And he picks up that story and he takes it back to the court of Persia, where suddenly now it gets translated and they realize that now this can be used for training our bureaucrats. And from there it gets translated to Arabic. I think the title is Kalila wa Dima or something like that. And eventually it gets translated into Latin and Greek and Hebrew. It is one of the first titles that gets printed when the printing press arrives in Italy. So now what explained the fact that in ancient times our stories could move at the pace at which they did? Probably, I don't know, this could be a simplistic answer, and I guess probably Sanjeev will shed light on this, but I feel that given the fact that we were such a significant contributor to global GDP, that we also were punching beyond our weight. And in that capacity, you had a lot of cultural movement happening, which became far easier. It's like today, the power of, let's say, Hollywood to be able to influence outcomes in different parts of the world. A lot of that is related to the hard power of the US. So that's my very, very broad opinion.
Thanks. Yeah, like the question, I think your answer is also very thought-provoking. So as you were saying, I thought maybe perhaps it's the issue of language. That when we wrote from our soul, from our vital. And today, the major conversations are being attempted in English, and I plead guilty to that as well. Sanjeev, he mentioned a very important issue, which is that the Panchatantra, where governance systems that existed earlier, maybe 3,000 years earlier, not 5,000 as we are, and were repackaged into a story form and given as lectures or teaching material to the children of kings. Has the governance, I feel that since then our governance systems have evolved far more, they have become extremely complex, and every day we are seeing a new complexity coming around them, not only in technology, but in aspirations. As we are changing from a poor nation to a middle-income nation, there is a texture of aspirations which is changing, which is impacting governance and vice versa. How do you see this? How is this evolution of governance from the ancient times till today and going into the future going to play in the India storytelling and retain its Sanatanata?
So let me first congratulate Rahul Diwan for putting this thing together. So give him a round of applause. Amazing commitment to the cause. So Well done. Now, as far as getting the storytelling and the importance of that in the way we think of our governance or how we live our lives, let me say that, first of all, human beings do not think in statistics, they think in stories. And this is one of the problems that the right wing has, because the right wing tends to think in statistics and maths and all these kinds of things. And they are continuously confused. Why is it that even though it's obvious that many of the things they say make sense, there'll be some, heart-wrenching story the other side will tell, maybe even lie about it, but still tell it well, and they will be able to get away with it. So one of the things that you've got to learn is that human beings ultimately think in stories and not in statistics. So it is important to get those values, those ideas, etc., to be turned into stories that we feel. And so this is true of governance as it is much as true of any other part of the system. So the Panchatantra is a good example. But in the end, it is much easier to explain, so for example, the concept of rule of law through episodes in the Ramayana than if it is even through Kautilya. So Kautilya may be a manual, and there won't be too many people in this audience who will understand it. But what are both sides of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, as I have said before, are actually a debate on the issue of rule of law. The Ramayana makes the case that it is the word of the law that matters, and the Mahabharata makes the case that it is the spirit of the law that matters. And really that is a debate, interestingly, between Ram and Krishna. Ram goes to the extent of sending away his wife, even though he knows it is unfair, but the law says something, so he follows it. Krishna, on the other hand, follows the spirit of the law. He twists the law, but to serve the principle. For example, in the case, when Draupadi is dragged into the court, the law says that, as a slave, Duryodhan is allowed to pull off her upper garment. But there is no rule about how long it can be. So Krishna turns the sari into something infinitely long. Here, justice is served, even if the word of the law is still kept going.
So I want you to bring it to the contemporary.
So I want to bring this.
How do we?
So first of all, this debate has not ended. It is not an easy debate we continuously have this debate even today, and it has not ended. But the reason I'm bringing this up in that context is that it is important to do the storytelling. No, if I had got up here and said, case number XYZ, Supreme Court, something versus the Republic of India, and said half of you would have left the audience and left. I can explain this concept with the greatest of simplicity because we as a civilization have remembered the stories as frameworks and anchors for the conversations that we can have even today. So, the reason the Mahabharata, Ramayana, and by the way, have to be kept alive is because it provides the framework for these conversations to be had. Interestingly, in the West, Christianity and the story of Jesus Christ used to provide it, and to some extent still does. But interestingly, they have now increasingly gone back to the pre-Christian pagan myths as being a better way of telling these stories. But how have they come back? They have interestingly come back as the result of their Hollywood movies, which in recent times have become much, much more like mythology, telling stories of mythology. Even Batman and Spider-Man stories actually have a lot more in common with their old pagan myths. Now, we didn't have a break in that civilization. So we can actually take the continuity and retell. There's so many stories to be told. So take, for example, the contemporary retelling of Narasimha that has gone completely viral. Now, an entire new generation has grown up actually watching this. This now provides the framework for their conversations. The frameworks of my generation of conversations happened differently from my parents. My parents' generation heard the stories of our mythology, etc., from their grandparents. We, interestingly, may have heard the bits and pieces from our grandparents, but mostly learnt it from our Amar Chitra Katha or the TV serials of the 1980s. My kids will learn it from these, Narasimha on the screen, or from Amish Tripathi.
Insta Wisdom.
Insta Wisdom. whatever it is. The point of the matter is, as long as they are broadly true to the spirit and are not being subverted, which is always a danger, but as long as they are broadly true to the spirit of the stories, and by and large, if we do a good job of it, these stories will continue to remain in the consciousness and provide the frameworks for social, economic, any other conversations.
Thanks. I want to take this. He mentioned a conversation between Sri Ram and Sri Krishna. I want you to look at them as political entities and come to 2014 onwards, where we see a substantial change in the way we engage with our past. What are the learnings we get from the Sri Ram, Sri Krishna conversation? How can they be applied today? And this change that we see, this room that is filled with people, the hundreds of lit fests that happen every year in India, are they a semicolon or are they here to stay? In other words, is this change towards, is this drift, is this return to Sanatan Dharma here to stay at a mass level, or will it go away in case there is a political change?
I think so I'll answer the second question first. I think the change is at the public conscious level. And if that change cannot go away just by political dispensation change. That, I think, is here to stay, because more and more parents are feeling the need to hear these stories again, to read about these stories again and pass it on to their children, not only because it's the past, because they believe that there is value to it. They believe that what they're seeing in the West, probably, the way the families are breaking, the way people are going into depression, and the way all these mental health issues are rising, the answer probably lies in some of the stories which have been told before. Because they instill the values, substitute of which we probably haven't found yet. And we go back to those stories because they, as Sanjeev very rightly said, are still relevant. The other point which you mentioned about Sri Ram and Sri Krishna, the one thing that both absolutely align on is the principle of dharma. Both Sri Ram, Sri Krishna insist on ensuring dharma prevails. What is dharma? As I have said it so many times, dharma in principle means that which upholds and sustains. So what sustains this society going forward? That is dharmic. What is it that will ensure that Bharat or India, as we see today, progresses, prospers, and retains its cultural identity with its values, which allow people to become happy today? That is the principle that both Sri Ram and Sri Krishna agree on. The tools might be little different to establish it. Today, what is our goal? Can we agree on that overall goal? The path will open up. Because what is the path? The path is to say that whatever we do it for the social well-being, social upliftment, not catering to one person's or the other person's whim. In that case, so if you see Kautilya Arthashastra, if you see Ramayana, if you see Mahabharata, all three of them tell us that from a governance perspective, Praja Sukhe Sukham Ragnim, Praja Hite Hitam Cha, the government exists for the people. When we say democracy is for the people, by the people, whatever, government is for the people is a value enshrined in the Dharmic principle itself. And hence, it will remain relevant always. However, I also want to add one more thing. When Kautilya writes the Arthashastra, Sanjeev very rightly mentioned that very few people actually read it, but I think it should be read not only for the value it brings, but also for the process it has used. In Arthashastra, Kautilya actually studies the philosophers, the political philosophers who've come before him. He says, how do you appoint ministers? Yeah, he'll say, Manu says XYZ, Brahaspati says ABC, Naiti Kautilya. Kautilya does not agree. Kautilya believes we should do ABC. Why? Because this is going to help us now. So what are we saying? That the procedures, processes, steps have to become relevant, contemporary to current situation. And the current situation changes. Sanatan is Nitya Nutan, and that will always remain. But the larger cause, the larger principle is social upliftment. And you do what you need to do for that. So in principle terms, I think this still remains valid. Thank you.
So, Ashwin, how would you write the story? Sanjeev mentioned that nations don't progress, I'm just rewording it, on statistics or data. Although the sacredness of data is getting more and more important by the day, but by stories where people can engage emotionally, vitally, with passion. So how do we translate this governance? I think, for instance, Kautilya is brilliant because I just finished reading it for the 30th time. And the end, this is so-and-so, this is so-and-so, these are Kautilya's words. It's a true citation of what could have happened in ancient times. So who is the Kautilya of today? How are we adapting and moving further in today's governance, in today's society through storytelling?
So I think what has been brought out, Gautam, very nicely, both by Ami and Sanjeev, is the fact that the shortest distance between two people is a story. You can throw as much number, wisdom, information, knowledge, AI as you want, but a story will do the job which none of those things can do. But I would like to also pick up from what Ami just said, that if you look at the Arthashastra, Kautilya says, listen, Brihaspati said this, or XYZ said that, and now this is my view. In other words, there is an evolution that now in today's times, this is what it should be. And if you really look at the stories we have told in our country, they have also actually to a certain extent been reflective of the times in which they have been told. Otherwise, you would not have had 300 versions of a Ramayana. Why? Because each one, why do you have a Malabari Muslim Mapila Ramayana in which you make Ram into a sultan? Why? Why do you have a Jatak Ramayana in which Ram is a Bodhisattva? It is adaptation to the sensibility of that particular time. And nothing was more visible to me when I remember some years ago when I had gone to Calcutta to deliver a talk, and after a while I told the driver, I said, I have a couple of hours, take me to some interesting place. He took me to a temple where the deity being worshipped was Amitabh Bachchan. Now, and in fact, I can share it on Twitter, but I bought a book outside there which was known as the Amitabh Chalisa. So, but today we laugh at it, but supposing, let's say now you ask that question about 5,000 years from now. Supposing 5,000 years from now, the worship of Amitabh Bachchan as a deity has really caught on. And now there isn't one temple dedicated to him, but 10 lakh temples. And now, 5,000 years from now, you, Gautam, ask me, in your 5,000 year later avatar, you ask me, do you think that Amitabh Bachchan could have been a real man? But वही तो सवाल हम पूछ रहे हैं राम के बारे में, कृष्ण के बारे में और कई देवी देवताओं के बारे में. तो where I am coming from is कि हमारा जो जिसे कहते हैं परंपरा, the parampara has always been that there is some kernel of truth to a story, and we then continuously over the years and over the generations, we layer it with the sensibilities of our times. So in other words, if you think about it, an event like, let's say, for example, the Mahabharata, it is impossible to think that it could have evolved from something which was called the Jaya of about 25,000 verses to something called, let's say, the Bharat, which is double that size, to something called the Mahabharata, which is even double that size, unless and until there was some truth to that story. But with every generation, we kept on layering. And that's precisely what we are doing today. We are taking these old story ideas and we are adding our own layers to them. That's what is happening. Even to a certain extent, we are doing it a little more delicately in our country because our so-called belief system is intertwined with our mythology. I hate that word mythology, but our itihas and our belief system are intertwined. Hollywood can do a lot of the stuff that it wants to do because those belief systems have gone. They've disappeared. No one is worshipping Hercules anymore. So that is the only difference. But to say that storytelling is not evolving and that we are not doing what, let's say what Tulsidas did with Valmiki's Ramayana, it is actually happening. right in front of us.
Thanks. So the new, for instance, Ashok Banker's Ramayana is an edition, is 301st Ramayana, and Amish's Ramchandra series 302nd Ramayana, and the principles remain the same. I mean, you tell the basic principles are the same, right? Just yes or no.
We have to be very careful with that in today's day and age, because, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why.
Okay, we don't have time.
There's one word, I have to say this, because there's one word which Sanjeev used right in the very beginning. You have to retell your stories, but not subvert them, right? And that is very important. Sometimes people are retelling the stories, not maintaining the spirit or the core.
But that can be said of all the 1,200 Mahabharats as well.
Not
because
really. So if you see Tulsidas ji, right?
only the
Tulsidas ji-
Bhagavad Gita, for instance, has remained more or less the same.
No, I think,
but everything else around.
No. I think all the very famous ones, right? Like Tulsidas ji's Ramayana, or maybe Amish's. The core they have maintained, the spirit they have maintained. But if you say, oh, Ram-Ravan Yuddh was an Aryan-Dravidian war, then I will not accept it. Because that is changing the core. It is not. It was never about identities. And that has to be preserved. Thank you.
Okay, so last question, and we have only 17 minutes. My last question is, so we've talked about storytelling, we've talked about governance and politics. My last question is about spiritual tradition. So we have inherited a huge library of spiritual traditions from the Vedas to the Darshanas. And other than Sri Aurobindo, whose work I am conversant with, nobody has taken these ideas forward. He has. Where are the Rishis of 21st century? Where are they hiding? What are they writing? How are they engaging at a time when our lifespans have changed, the way we dress, the way we sit has changed, the way we converse, we can reach anywhere across the globe in an instant. Everybody is a Sanjay today. There is no exclusivity to Dhritarashtra anymore. Everybody is a Sanjay. Everybody is talking all the time. Where are our Rishis who are taking our spiritual traditions forward, hiding?
So you have to understand that right from the beginning, Sanatan Dharma was set up as a evolving system. Those who set it up were aware that it will evolve into the future. This is a fundamentally different way of thinking about it than Abrahamic faiths think about it. So they, right in the beginning, divided up all our texts into two. One is the Shruti tradition and the Smriti tradition. The Shruti tradition consists only of the first three, maybe you can add the fourth, but basically the Samhitas of the Vedas. Not the Upanishads, not the Vedangas, not the Brahmanas, just the Samhitas, Mantra Samhitas. Now, why this is important is that this is the only bit that is canonical. Everything else is actually can be added on. They are Smriti, they are the great thoughts, interpretations and ideas of those who came later. Now, what this does is effectively Hinduism functions a bit like your smartphone. There is an operating system, which is the Shruti, and the apps that you can keep adding or deleting, which is the Smriti. Now, this allows you to eternally add new ideas as long as you are broadly compatible with the operating system. Now, this is why it is very important to keep writing new Upanishads, writing new Puranas, and so on. You can't mess around with the original operating system unless you happen to be a Rishi. So, therefore, Rishis come relatively rarely, but you can have Shastris, and you can have new sort of Munis and so on, who write new Smritis.
Point taken. So 5,000 years from now, when our descendants look back, they will say all of us were a bunch of just, we couldn't add anything to the Shruti. And
you can't add it easily. There may be the odd person who will come along. So for example, many thousands of years after the original Shruti texts were compiled, Veda Vyas were managed to edit them and separate them. So there have been periods of it, and by the way, there are Yajur Veda, for example, has different versions. There's the Krishna and the Shukla. So there are some changes have been made along the way, but relatively few. So by and large, for example, the Rig Veda is true to whatever were the compilations done in the early Bronze Age.
So taking Sanjeev's word as read and assimilated, how do you see the fact that the Shruti itself and the Smritis later on are in fact a process where the human material gets divinized. All of us are destined to be gods, to be a super consciousness, howsoever you choose to define it. If everybody is a god, why isn't everybody listening to the Shrutis?
So I love that metaphor, by the way, of an operating system and apps, because it just becomes, now this is again exactly what we were talking about. He made this into a story. It's so easy to understand it when you apply that metaphor. And by the way, just to answer that first question, where are our Rishis and Munis? The other day, Sanjeev, I came across a picture on Facebook which popped up yesterday. Apparently, you, me, and Gautam were launching your book, Ocean of Churn, in Bombay. I can't remember which, 7 years, 10 years, how long ago that was. But Gautam's pic in that is with very, very short-cut hair, and which is black color. अब आप अपने लंबे बाल देखिए.
He's on his way to be a Rishi.
He's already the Rishi. That's the point I'm saying. कि आज के ऋषि यहाँ पर बैठे हैं. But the long and short of this is really that, to my mind, what we can best do in our age. There was this wonderful presentation that happened in the morning regarding digitization of manuscripts. It was a beautiful presentation. We have all of this ancient knowledge available to us. If it can be classified, aggregated, digitized, made searchable, meta-tagged, right? Now imagine when you take the power of AI and apply it to that. Now imagine the sort of stories that could possibly emerge when you have suddenly added computing power to that ancient knowledge. Immediate translations available in 300 odd languages.
So AI is the new Vedvyas.
It's very possible that many products, permutations and combinations, including new Shruti-Smritis, everything, will emerge as a result of that computing power. But, so in other words, we may not necessarily be known in the future as the people who necessarily provided the original thought, but we provided the ability to be able to understand and analyze that original thought.
New Tulsi Dasas.
Can I add something to all that has been spoken? Because the question you asked is, where are the Rishis of today? And becoming a Shastri or somebody who's reinterpreting, writing about something that has existed already, I think that's easier. And a lot of us, I wouldn't say Shastri level, but somewhere we do our contribution to that. But how does one become a Rishi? Is there like a process one follows? Not really. We've had Rishis. We've had Aurobindo. We've had Ramana Maharishi, who did not necessarily go back and study the scriptures and everything, but the knowledge came to them, right? So when we say, why aren't God speaking to us? That's because we probably haven't evolved ourselves to that level. But is it possible? Is it possible to get to that level, especially if somebody has that Devanugraha? I want to mention something from Patanjali Yoga Sutras. So Yoga Sutra says that how does one become a yogi? Yeah, it says one, it is you are born with the sanskaras. Now, born with the sanskaras, you're already lucky and done. The second way, he says, through this practice of Ashtanga Yoga, and I'm telling you this practice of yoga. Now, what does yoga really talk about? Yoga is all about developing your inner self or inner engineering, as today we are talking about, right? Apart from losing out on the knowledge tradition, we have sort of lost on the practice tradition as well. And to get new rishis, I think that practice has to come back. Is it doable? Definitely. Because if you see the education system that Kautilya talks about, yeah, he says there are 4 topics for a leader. He's trying to make a king out of the prince. What are the 4 topics? Dandaniti, of course. Varta, finance and all that, of course. Trai, he talks about the Vedas. The 4th is the most important. He says Anvikshiki. Anvikshiki means the art of anveshan, the art of thinking, critical thinking, if you may. Within that, interestingly, he gives 3 topics. Yeah, he says what should be taught in Anvikshiki? Yoga, Sankhya, and Lokayata. Lokayata is what is Charvak Darshan. Now, we look down upon Charvak Darshan, but Charvak is Pratyaksha Pramana. Basically, you believe what you see. You do experiments, you find out proofs, you prove them and then you believe them, which is science today. So Kautilya is not rejecting science, by the way. We cannot say that, oh, humko sab malum hai, we don't have to prove anymore. Because we do that, what is happening? We have labs in the US who are doing lot of research on yoga and they are actually coming up with amazing stuff. And we are sitting here saying, "Arey, usne hamara chori kiya, ha?" Arey, but he's still working on it. You cannot say that, oh, you can't work on it. They're working on it. They're coming out with proofs. And if we close ourselves to using the scientific method, we will only sit here and say, chori kiya, chori kiya. I think that also has to evolve. The other two, as I said, yoga and Sankhya. Sankhya is about analytics. And yoga is about looking inside. And I believe whatever else IKS does, if this is one thing that our children are already initiated into, it might, I don't know, becoming a Rishi is a different thing altogether, but at least coming up with new innovative ideas will definitely help. Thank you.
So in this same line, let me say that, look, the difference between a Rishi and other scholars is whether or not you have achieved the right to interfere with the operating system or not. And there are relatively few people who will be allowed to do it, because if you did messing around with the operating system too often, you will cause all kinds of problems. So that is why typically we do not even usually refer to the likes of Swami Vivekananda, or even Shankara is not referred to as a Rishi, because while they did introduce a huge number of changes, they by and large use the original operating system of the Vedic system. Now, having said that, while we may occasionally need or get a Rishi to come and clean up the operating system and upgrade it, there is plenty to be done in the, on the Smriti side of things. Ami just mentioned Sankhya and Yoga. By the way, there is an amazing lineage of thought which is Nyaya, which is incredible because, for example, the issue that it gets into is Nyaya, by the way, does not mean justice. It actually means the process of arriving at the truth. So the process of arriving at the truth has many interesting implications. For example, today in the world of AI, one of the problems we deal with today is what is the truth? Because there's so much non-truth floating around in the system, or half-truth, that in fact it deals with the issue of what is to be constituted as good proof. That is what Nyaya is about, and how do you then use that to arrive at the truth. There is a lot of work that can be done to go back to this thinking of creating new apps. And by the way, our ancients were very conscious of this business of creating new apps. And that this business of creating new apps does not interfere with the operating system. Because you see, there is a huge danger of that followers of any of the specific traditions will always make the claim that their specific text is as good as the Vedas. For example, very often Vaishnavas will say that the Bhagavad Gita is just the fifth Veda. Actually, that is not the correct way of thinking about it. And those who wrote the Bhagavad Gita were conscious of this. So the Bhagavad Gita is not the word of God. It is as reported by Sanjay. It is deliberately done like this in order to avoid this problem and having this debate. The thing is that we therefore need to create a tradition of new ideas, Vedas, Upanishads, etc. But, as I said, we need to also be conscious that we are adding to the Smriti tradition and not the Shruti tradition.
Any more questions? Oh.
Namaskar ji. My name is Anu Lal. And I'm coming up with a book on the Bishnoi community, but I'm not pitching the book here, just using it as an example. So the Bishnois are the world's first environmentalists. Ramayana and Mahabharata are itself filled with examples of ecological wisdom, right? But hum wo sab kuch set aside karke, we import SDG frameworks from the West. And we invest our whole energy working on them. Like we said, are there any new Rishis we can expect jo sustainability smritis likhenge? Because eventually, if we keep importing everything from the West, this culture is not going to be used.
Got it.
Until it's used, it's not lived.
You want to take that, Sanjeev? Anybody else? Yeah, can you take the mic over there, please? This gentleman right here in blue shirt.
Well, the whole ESG, SDG thing, I'm afraid, is itself, as I have said many times, mostly a scam. Created by NGOs and consultancies who have an economic interest in perpetuating them. So in fact, they have nothing to do with ecology at all, but to do with business plans. So the reason they have done so well is because it is in somebody's economic interest to perpetuate it. So, first of all, we shouldn't equate these two things at all. Having said that, we do have our own indigenous systems, but we need to invest into them. And as Amy said, that we should not criticize. There is something good about the Western system, is that they keep adding to the knowledge and modernizing it. We probably, because we do not understand our own system and the way we have set it up to evolve, we try to interestingly Abrahamize our ancient knowledge by saying the Ayurved ne Charak ne bola tha, therefore it is true. No, you have to test even Charak.
Thanks, Sanjeev. Blue shirt, please.
Hi, my name is Ashish Asthana. I'm an entrepreneur. My question is very simple. Ramayana and Mahabharata, when do we and how do we start talking about them as our history and not just our mythology?
Okay, so I think Ashwin can answer that. History, itihas, etc.
I think that is already happening. I mean, I personally feel it's already happening. I think Ami spoke about the fact that in some ways there was a lost generation. If you really think about it, there have been at least around maybe 100 or 200 years, starting from British times, where we started referring to these works as mythology. And it's now sort of requiring consistent reminders कि भाई ये हमारा इतिहास है. That if, unfortunately, to a very great extent, what happens is that we treat the word that has been written under the classification of history as real, whereas our epics are considered quote unquote unreal, fantasy almost. But one of my favorite definitions of the word history is from George Santana. He said, history is a pack of lies about events that never happened, written by people who were never there. So in that sense, how much of your history that you read about an event of 1857. Here in India, we are taught it was the first war of independence. We are taught about it as the Great Rebellion. But in the UK, it is not even taught. And if it is taught at college level, then it is the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. So which version are we going to accept? The point I'm simply trying to make is that sometimes in some ways, what C.S. Lewis said is absolutely true, that a myth may be a lie, but it is a lie that reveals a deeper truth. So maybe it's time for us to start focusing on what was that deeper truth which was being conveyed through our epics.
Can I add to that? Just 2 minutes here. Itihas, Puran have been used together since ages. And our ancestors were always clear what is Itihas and what is Puran. Itihas was always Ramayana and Mahabharata. Purans would probably fall in the mythology category. Mythology does not mean false. I think that is itself a big myth that mythology means false. Mythology means belief systems of a group of people which have, as he said, a deeper truth conveyed through stories of our gods and goddesses and all of that, yeah? So the Purans fall into that category. So calling them mythology is not really wrong. If I'm a Vaishnav, Bhagavad Puran is as true for me as anybody else, yeah? It might not be so for a Shaivite. For them, the Shiva Puran might be the full truth, right? So that understanding was always there. And hence, the Shiva Puran, Vishnu Puran, Bhagavad Puran were all Puran. And Mahabharata, Ramayana were always Itihas. Let there never be a doubt about it. Thank you.
Namaste everyone. My name is Saugat Chakravarti. My question is to Sanjeev sir, specifically. Since we are specifically discussing Sanatan storytellers, this particular session, is there a framework the new generation of storytellers should follow to ensure the stories, the epics, the tales this particular civilization, our civilization has the essence of it, the core themes of it actually transcends to the people. They understand the gravity of these epics. Is there a framework the new generation of storytellers should follow? Thank you.
Well, I think everybody here can answer that, but my answer to this will be a very simple one. As long as the broad essence of the story is kept, I think you can innovate in multiple ways. Amish is not here, but he's a dear friend of all of us. He has done it in a particular way. The Amar Chitra Katha did it in a particular way. This new Narasimha movie does it in a particular way. as long as the broad essence of the story is respected, innovating around it is perfectly fine. Because after all, we have ended up with all these versions of these stories through these innovations in the first place. I mean, the Mahabharata, we know for a fact, it starts as Jaya, becomes Bharata, and then becomes Mahabharata. Obviously, stuff was added along the way. We are not even pretending about this. So, the point being made is, this has to be made relevant. And by the way, in my particular case, I am perfectly fine with creating completely new texts, new stories, which can be written. It can be written with Fox, ancient mythological characters, or you can place it in totally modern times. Does not matter to me very much. The point is, our tradition and civilization moves forward by adding new stories. And those new stories are just as important. Telling the story of, for example, Shivaji Maharaj. It's a part of now, I would say that's a part of the canonical, not the canonical, but the storytelling tradition of this country. There are other stories that we can add from our times about, and over time they'll get mythologized. That is perfectly fine.
The revolutionaries that you have.
Yeah, the revolutionary stories that
I
have been writing. Those are interesting stories.
Last question. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this brilliant panel discussion. And I'm getting to talk with some of the legends. And right now, speaking to you, I almost feel that my heart is pounding and my heart will come out of my mouth talking to you. But I'm an entrepreneur, okay? I've been into storytelling all my life. And I'm making a video about my experience and learnings in this conference. And there has been a question that I started this journey with since I left Pune yesterday evening, and that is that Bharat has a packaging problem. And more than that, one of the things that I see is, why isn't entrepreneurship, building profitable businesses with the ideas of Bharat being talked about quite often? Because we have ideas, we have shastras, we have things that can be built into $1 million or billion-dollar companies, like how Sanjeev talked about Nyaya Shastra, right? Not just that. Why don't we have a cultural phenomenon like animes or the K-pop? That is a global phenomenon.
I'm going to take the packaging part
Yes.
and close this session. I think, Ami, you've been packaging a lot of complex ideas of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana into very accessible, conversational books. So, where do you see, why is he not able to, why is Indian business, is his question, not able to package? I disagree with the thesis, but let us say parts of it are true. Why are we not able to build the narratives?
I think there are multiple things there. But one is, how simply are you able to communicate something that people understand in their current life stage, right? Past is great, but if past is not going to help me right now, then what? Is it just for nostalgia or for, oh, I feel very good about it? Or is there something in it for me which I can learn and apply? I might not be doing it consciously, so that it becomes easier for me to relate, right? That I think is important. Second, yes, there is a packaging problem, but very recently, last week, I saw this beautiful musical called Rajadhiraj. You've seen the Phantom of the Opera and stuff. You must have seen the Broadway shows. We never had anything of that sort before. But you look at Rajadhiraj, what a musical. Who's doing it? The money of the Ambanis, basically. Dhanraj Natwani, they are doing it. So when some of these money comes, we can do the best. We can match anybody else. So somewhere we have, till now, I think in the last 70 years, we've been constrained by the capital itself. I don't think there is lack of ideas. There is lack of capital. So the other thing is, how lucky are you to reach out to those entrepreneurs who can fund you. And that is why what Rahul is attempting with his Hindu fund is so important, right? Because hopefully that will now help us tell our stories better in a more relevant way, and we won't be constrained by the capital. So that's one point I wanted to make.
Thank you very much, everybody. I began with the question that what will our descendants look like? I returned with no clear answers yet. But I hope this will be an evolving conversation. And some of you who are brave enough to take this up and become Rishis or create new universes based on the Sanatan storytelling format will take it up. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.